Today's video is going to be a really different one for me, but one that I've been thinking about making for a while. If you don't know me, my name is Laura and I have two girls, a 7 and a 3-year-old. Today I'm going to talk about my childhood. I'm going to talk about a heart condition that I had, and that is Wolff Parkinson White Syndrome, or WPW. Now I feel like I need to say I'm not a medical professional, I am not a doctor, I am a blogger, but this is just my experience, and also my experience of 1984. So when I was born, obviously medical science comes a long way, and if you're looking for medical advice, don't come here. But this is just my experience and my memories of what happened to me and my personal feelings of what happened to me as a child. So most people probably don't even know that I had or have this heart condition, because it isn't something that I feel the need necessarily to talk about now. But I know that it is comforting if you have been diagnosed with this, or if somebody you know has, to get real people's experiences of this. So what Wolff Parkinson White Syndrome is an extra electrical impulse in your heart. It happens when you're in the womb, and it's a strand of heart muscle that grows. It can be anywhere on the heart, it isn't in a specific place, and I don't actually know where mine was, but your heart obviously uses its own electrical impulses to help it to regulate its beats. And with an extra one, what it can cause, and it did cause in me, is palpitations. That's the #1 symptom. Lots of people are born with this condition and have it and don't even know. It can be picked up on a random ECG and they're not symptomatic and it doesn't cause any issues. But for me, and for most people who do have symptoms, it's the palpitations or tachycardia, which is a really fast heartbeat. And what I used to get was a supraventricular tachycardia, which is where it's just like super fast heartbeat. Mine would be sort of, I don't know, 200, 250 beats a minute, to a point where I know that the doctors didn't believe my mum at how fast my heart was beating. And I would have to go into hospital to realise that that was the case. So I think I was about 5 or maybe 6 when I was diagnosed. I don't know exactly all of, obviously, the details, but I know it wasn't when I was born. They didn't know about it when I was born, even though I think my mum said she always knew something wasn't quite right. But yeah, so I think I was about 5 or 6 and I was having these palpitations. I had an ECG, which is like a trace on your heart, and I think I had a heart monitor as well, which you like strap to you and wear for, I don't know, a week or something. So I had that, and it was detected that my heart obviously had this extra pathway. At the time I went to Birmingham Children's Hospital, which is quite away from where I live, to see a cardiologist, and I was to have an operation called a catheter ablation. So I was having quite frequent palpitation episodes, and it could happen for any reason. Obviously I was a child, so there was no sort of stress or caffeine or anything like that involved, and it wasn't necessarily triggered by exercise. But I remember one vividly of, we went to a fancy dress party and I was dressed as a cat in a black leotard. I think I must have been about 6 or 7, and I had face paints and, you know, cat ears and all the works. I had one of these palpitation episodes and ended up in the hospital dressed as a cat. Now, it was a fancy dress party, and I don't remember, my mum and dad must have also been in fancy dress, so it was probably more embarrassing for them, but as a child I was just mortified. So yeah, that was an experience. But as I would have these palpitation episodes, and they did feel like your heart was literally going to jump out of your body. Obviously it was quite scary, but once I was also used to it, it wasn't scary anymore, but it was just unreal, the feeling that when obviously you've done a lot of exercise and your heart beats really fast, it's sort of like that, but so intense. And obviously you can feel dizzy and faint, and I would have to obviously sit down when I was ever having these sorts of palpitations or you know, really, really fast ones. And I would be admitted to hospital to make sure that they could stop it. I know when I was a child, what they had said to me was that it was an extra valve, and this operation that I was going to have was going to put an umbrella in this extra valve and to stop it. That's how they explained it to me when I was a child. So we had to wait for the equipment to come from, I think it was America. We had to wait quite a long time, but like I said before, obviously medical science comes a long way, and I don't think it is such a big thing anymore. We were sort of told that, I think it was probably quite scary for my mum and dad and my family. I've got 2 older sisters, because we were told to just be careful of me, not necessarily like I was fragile, but if I had these episodes, there was a risk of like sudden death, that people would just die because whether their electrical impulses didn't work properly and the heart stopped, or whether it went too fast and obviously the heart stopped. But I think obviously that is very, very rare, but still scary, because the doctors have to tell you this, and it does happen to some people. And I know that somebody that was on the waiting list when we were on the waiting list, it also happened to, which always puts that doubt in your mind. And yeah, so it must have been really scary, but I don't think that I felt that when I was a child. I think you're a bit naive and a bit oblivious, aren't you, anyway, even though I was sort of going in for all these tests all the time. So when I think I was 9, so 1993 or 94, I went into Birmingham Children's Hospital for a catheter ablation, and that is keyhole surgery. So they put a camera, I think I had 2 incisions here and 1 in each side of the groin. One was a catheter, a tube that they would use to, I think it's cauterize or freeze, whichever is safest in whichever part of heart that your extra electrical impulse is. And they would zap it basically, and it fixes it. So in most cases, that is all that you need. So I had 2 incisions on each side of the groin for the camera and the tube, and 2 here. I have tiny, tiny, tiny scars, so much so that you can barely see them. But like I said, as it was keyhole surgery, there was no open heart surgery or anything like that. I stayed in, I think, for 2 days maybe. It was hard to walk afterwards, and I know I stayed downstairs, but I definitely had a bed downstairs, and I was off school for maybe a month, 6 weeks, because I couldn't walk up the stairs. But I don't know that that's not such a big deal these days. If you have the catheter ablation, I think now they go home the same day, I'm sure it is. But that was my experience, and I remember lapping it up. So I was at home getting fed grapes at the bottom of the stairs, and my 2 sisters would have to fetch me everything. So I know that it was a stressful time for everybody, and I remember being really scared. When I was in the hospital, there was lots and lots of obviously sick children in the ward, and I remember it really vividly. Obviously I was 9, so you do sort of have those memories, and I had to have antibiotics intravenously afterwards, overnight, or maybe it was before, I can't remember quite. But that stung, and I remember being awake for all of that time because it was just really hurt. Intravenous antibiotics are like really painful. But then when I came home from that, and once I'd been like recovered and gone back to school and everything like that, I didn't ever have any more issues. I went back to the cardiologist 6 months after my operation, and I had a stress test, which is like you exercise and they put an ECG monitor on you to check that obviously everything has gone back to normal and it's all fine, and they try to make your heart go like into palpitations in order to make sure that obviously it's not going to. And I only had that one follow-up appointment because I didn't need any more, and I have not seen a cardiologist since. The one thing that I have forgot to mention was when I had my operation, I think it was 9 hours that I remember, but when I was in there, I technically died, but my heart flatlined. I think when they were doing the cauterization, I think some of the drugs that they helped to stop the heart, I don't know exactly, obviously, I'm sorry, I don't know exactly, but my heart stopped, and so I had to have defibrillators to restart it again. And that was always like a fun fact. When I was a child, I had like the ECG strip that they like came out, and you can obviously see where my heart had stopped and where it flatlined, and that was like show and tell type of things when I went back to school. So although obviously it is a big deal, and it was probably more of a big deal for my parents than it was for me, it's just sort of normal for me now. So when I had my children, obviously labour puts a lot of stress on your body and on your heart, so I was under consultant led care in order to make sure that nothing sort of happened. But that was with my first labour, and once they'd realised that everything was fine, there was no problems, my second labour obviously wasn't the same. But both of my children have had ECGs when they were born, just to check, because although it was an anomaly for us, and it can be for many people, it can also be like genetic, like passed through families. So yes, they've both had ECGs and both passed with flying colours. So they don't have it, which is brilliant. But I don't feel like it definitely changed my childhood, obviously. But after that, and once I'd had that in primary school, once I'd left, I never had any problems past that. So yeah, that is my Wolff Parkinson White Syndrome story. If I haven't covered anything or I've forgotten anything, I'll link below, you know, anything that I feel like can add to the story, or a link to NHS where there's more medical information rather than experience. But if you have any questions, then leave them below and I will try to answer them. And thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.